I never planned on falling for anyone during that trip. I barely even planned on going. When Mason invited me, it was in his usual way, half teasing, half insisting, like he knew better than I did what I needed. Maybe he did. All I knew then was I'd been stuck. Stuck in my own head, in my small apartment, in a loop of waking up tired and going to sleep more exhausted than I'd started. The mountains were supposed to be a reset. Fresh air, clean silence, no cell service. Mason said it'd be good for my head. I think he meant it would shut me up. He was bringing some old friends, guys I didn't really know but had met at a few house parties. Loud, fun types with names that blurred together. Except Jonas. I'd met him once months ago, in passing. He'd been quiet then, too. Not shy, just removed, like the noise of the world reached him from very far away. He was the first person I saw when I got in the van. Sitting by the window, hood up, earbuds in, not looking at anyone. He nodded when I said his name, but nothing more. Still, I chose a seat across from him. Something about the way he stared out the glass made me want to know what he was seeing. The drive was long. Snow had fallen the night before, and the roads weren't fully cleared. The guys filled the van with stories, jokes, and bad music. Mason played DJ, Ty flirted with literally everyone, and I just listened, letting their energy pull me somewhere lighter. Jonas stayed silent for most of it. He only spoke once, when Ty handed him a bottle of water, and even then it was barely more than a murmur. I caught him looking at me once. Just a second, not even long enough to register, but his gaze had weight, like he wasn't just seeing me, but reading something on my face that I didn't know was written there. When we reached the cabin, night had already swallowed the mountains. The place was bigger than I expected. Logs stacked like puzzle pieces, a wraparound porch, smoke curling from a chimney. It was beautiful, but lonely in a way that made my chest tighten, like it had been waiting for us, or for someone. We unloaded bags, picked rooms. Jonas and I ended up sharing a 2-bedroom upstairs. Mason must have done that on purpose. He had a habit of putting things in motion and pretending it was chance. We barely said a word to each other while unpacking. Jonas moved with a quiet rhythm, deliberate, like every movement was protecting something fragile. I didn't ask questions. I just watched. He hung up a hoodie, tucked a book into the nightstand drawer. I noticed his hands shook a little when he thought no one was looking. That night, we gathered around the fireplace. Ty lit a cigar even though no one wanted one, and Mason pulled out a bottle of bourbon that got passed around. Laughter came easy for everyone else. I sipped slowly, nodding when necessary, my eyes drifting toward Jonas every few minutes. He sat at the edge of the room, half in shadow, legs stretched out, head tipped back against the couch. He looked tired, not in a way of someone needing sleep, but like he was carrying a silence so loud it had wore him thin. Eventually, he stood and slipped out to the back door without a word. Something about the way he moved, too fast to be casual, too slow to be urgent, caught me off guard. I waited maybe a minute, then followed. The porch was cold, the boards creaking under my feet. I saw him at the edge, near the railing, back to me, head bowed. I almost turned around, almost told myself it was none of my business. Instead, I said his name. He didn't startle, didn't even turn. He just exhaled, a cloud of breath hanging in the air. "I'm fine," he said, but it didn't sound like the truth. "I didn't ask," I replied. It came out sharper than I intended. That made him glance back, just a flick of his eyes. He looked at me like he was deciding whether to let me in or let me vanish. Then quietly, "I don't like crowds." I nodded, stepping beside him. The sky above was ink black, scattered with stars. Far away from the city noise, everything felt stripped down. Honest. "Neither do I," I said. We stood there for a while, not speaking. But it didn't feel empty. It felt necessary, like we were both sifting through words we weren't ready to say. Then he whispered, "You ever feel like you're pretending to be okay for so long, you forget what real feels like?" His voice cracked on the last word. Just barely. I turned toward him, unsure if I should answer. He was looking out over the trees, eyes glinting from the moonlight. I could see the outline of him, shoulders tight, jaw set, like he was bracing for something that hadn't come yet. "Yeah," I said, "all the time." He looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time that night, I felt seen. When we went back inside, nothing had changed for the others. Ty was still loud, Mason still pouring drinks. But something had shifted between Jonas and me, subtle, unspoken. That night, lying in our separate beds, I stared at the ceiling and listened to his breath settle into sleep. I didn't know what was coming. I didn't know what he was holding back, or what I was about to step into. But I knew this much. Something had begun out there on that porch. And part of me was already afraid it wouldn't last. The next morning was quiet in a way only mountain air could manage. Crisp and clean, like the earth had press reset overnight. Sunlight leaked through the blinds, thin and soft, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. I woke before Jonas. From the top bunk, I could see him lying perfectly still beneath the blanket, one arm tossed over his forehead like he was shielding himself from dreams that didn't let him rest. I climbed down silently, trying not to wake him. My body was sore from the long hike, but there was something grounding about that soreness, like proof I still existed in more than just my thoughts. Downstairs, the others were already half awake. Ty flipped pancakes with way too much confidence, and Mason was on the porch taking selfies with the fog behind him. "Morning, Caleb." Ty grinned, tossing a pancake too high. "We're making breakfast like civilized men." "Debatable," I mumbled and poured myself coffee. Jonas didn't come down until we were almost done eating. He looked tired again, like sleep hadn't touched him at all. He mumbled a greeting, sat beside me, and picked at a piece of toast like it was a foreign object. Ty slid him a mug of coffee with a wink. Jonas gave a weak smile, but didn't hold the eye contact long. We spent most of the morning in the clearing behind the cabin. Someone had brought a football. Ty and Mason tried to rally a game, but it turned into more laughter than movement. Jonas drifted around the edges of the group like smoke, close enough to be seen, distant enough to feel unreachable. At one point, Mason called him over. "Come on, man. At least pretend to have fun." Jonas shrugged. "I'm not good at pretending." That shut everyone up for a second. Then Ty clapped him on the back and changed the subject. Later, when the group split, half heading towards Shallow Stream, half staying behind, I ended up with Jonas again. We weren't alone on purpose, but it felt intentional, even if no one said it. We walked through a path that curved away from the others, the trees closing in overhead. Pine needles crunched underfoot, and the scent of wet moss clung to the air. Jonas didn't say much. I didn't push. Eventually, he spoke. "You ever feel like you don't belong in your own life?" The question came so suddenly, I thought he was joking. He wasn't. "All the time," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "Some mornings I wake up, and it's like I'm watching myself through a window." Jonas nodded, slowly. "I think I've been sleepwalking through mine, even before we got here." He paused, kicked at a stick. "I wasn't supposed to come on this trip." That caught my attention. "Why did you?" He took a long breath. "Because Mason begged. Said I needed it. Said I wasn't myself lately." "Were you?" He shook his head. "I don't think I know who that is anymore." We stopped at the edge of a narrow ridge. The view was breathtaking. Trees stretched for miles, their tips dusted with frost. Clouds drifted low, caught between peaks like secrets. Jonas sat on a large stone, hands clasped together, head bowed. "Sorry," he muttered. "Didn't mean to dump all that on you." "You didn't dump anything." He looked at me, and for the first time, his eyes held something warmer than silence. "You listen differently than the others." "Differently how?" "You don't fill space, just avoid it." That made me smile, even if it hurt a little. I wasn't used to people noticing that, or caring. For a long moment, we just sat there. Something was shifting. I could feel it in the way the air buzzed between us. Not quite tension, not quite peace. Something fragile. New. Jonas pulled something from his pocket. A small stone, smooth and dark. He turned it over in his hand like it held meaning. "My mom gave me this when I was 15, he said. Said it was from a beach we went to when I was a kid. I don't remember the trip, but I kept the stone. He handed it to me. It was warm from his palm. Why do you keep it? I asked, because it's the only thing I've never lost. I gave it back, careful not to touch his fingers too long, but he didn't take it right away. Just looked at me like he was memorizing something. The wind picked up cold against my cheeks. Jonas finally slipped the stone back into his pocket. We should get back, he said. Yeah, I replied, even though I didn't want to. As we made our way down the slope, I tripped slightly on a root. Jonas reached out and steadied me, his hand on my arm, quick and firm. We both froze for a second, not because of the fall, but because of the contact. His hand lingered. Then he let go. Neither of us said anything about it. Back at the cabin, the group was gathered by the fire again. Ty shot Jonas a look, some inside joke I wasn't part of, and Jonas smiled, soft but distant. I caught something flicker across Ty's face. Possessiveness? Maybe something else. That night, Jonas and I sat on the porch again. This time, he brought a blanket and a second mug of tea. He didn't say why. Just handed it to me and sat down beside me, closer than before. The stars were out again, scattered and bright. He leaned his head back, closed his eyes. I don't know what I'm doing, he said. I wanted to ask what he meant. I didn't. Instead, I said, me neither. And that was enough. But deep down, I felt it. I was falling into something I didn't understand. And I wasn't sure he was ready to catch me. The storm rolled in quicker than any of us expected. By late afternoon, the clouds had turned heavy and mean, swallowing the sun and painting the sky a bruised gray. The temperature dropped sharply, and by the time Mason noticed the wind shaking the trees like angry fists, it was too late to hike back down to the lookout we planned on visiting. So we stayed in. The cabin, once warm and open, suddenly felt smaller, its walls closer, its corners darker. Mason lit a fire. Ty made spiked hot chocolate, and someone found an old deck of cards that turned into a game of half-serious poker. Laughter bounced around, but something felt off. Or maybe that was just me. Jonas sat across the room, hunched in a chair with his legs pulled up, eyes fixed on the fire. Every now and then, he glanced over at Ty, who was unusually quiet tonight. I noticed it. I noticed everything. When Mason asked who'd help gather more firewood, no one jumped at the chance. I stood up, mostly to clear my head. The cabin had grown too loud, too tight. Jonas followed without being asked. He didn't say anything, just grabbed his coat and stepped into the cold after me. Outside, the wind howled through the pines. Snow had started to fall. Light, quick flakes that melted on contact. We walked in silence, flashlights cutting across the tree trunks. The air smelled sharp, clean. Thanks for coming, I said, finally breaking the quiet. He gave a soft shrug. Didn't feel like staying in there. I didn't think you were much of a poker guy. I'm not much a guy in general, he muttered with a small smirk. I laughed. It felt good, rare. We found the woodpile behind the shed, and I handed him a bundle while I took one of my own. As we turned to head back, I slipped on the icy ground. Not a bad fall, just enough to make me curse under my breath. Jonas bent to help me. His gloved hand gripped my arm, steadying me. For a second, we stayed like that. Me crouched, him above me, his breath visible in the narrow space between us. You always as graceful? He asked, eyes glinting. Only when people are watching. His hand didn't leave my arm. Not right away. When it did, something else stayed. A charge. Something unspoken that now buzzed between us like static. Back inside, the fire was roaring. Ty glanced up when we returned, his gaze flickering from Jonas to me, then back again. I caught something behind it, a flash of something I didn't want to name. Later that night, the power cut out. The storm must have taken down a line somewhere. The cabin sank into a hush, lit only by the fireplace and a few flickering lanterns. Mason tried to keep the energy high, turning it into a camping joke. Someone suggested telling ghost stories. Another passed around the bourbon again. I sat beside Jonas on the couch, knees barely touching. Our voices were low, private beneath the volume of the others. I used to like storms, he said, staring into the flames. When I was a kid, I thought they were alive. What changed? Life, I guess. It stopped being magic and started being noise. I wanted to ask more. But I didn't want to push. Instead, I leaned in slightly. You ever want to disappear into one? He looked at me then. The firelight flickered across his face, catching the softness in his expression, the weight in his eyes. Every day. We didn't speak after that for a while. Just sat there, the silence no longer awkward. Outside, the storm howled. Inside, something in me cracked a little, quiet and deep. Eventually, the others began drifting off to bed. Ty stayed up the longest, nursing a second cup of whiskey. He looked over at us once, his gaze lingering longer than it should have. Then he muttered something to Mason and went upstairs. Jonas and I remained on the couch, the fire shrinking. Neither of us moved. "You tired?" he asked, voice low. "Not really." He nodded. "Me neither." There was a pause. Then, softly, "You want to stay out here a bit?" I didn't answer. I just leaned back beside him, and he didn't move away. Minutes passed, maybe longer. At some point, our shoulders touched. He didn't flinch. Neither did I. Then he turned toward me. Not fully, just enough that I could feel his breath. The space between us shrank to inches. I didn't know who moved first. Maybe it was both of us at once. The kiss wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was careful, deliberate, like we were testing gravity to see if it still worked. His lips were cold at first, then warm. When we pulled apart, he didn't speak. Neither did I. We just sat there, forehead to forehead, the storm still raging outside, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was running from anything. Eventually, we slipped upstairs without waking the others. Back in the room, we didn't speak. He climbed into his bed. I climbed into mine. But that night, I didn't sleep. Not because of nerves or doubt. Because part of me knew something had changed. And not all change is safe. The next morning, the storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the snowfall. A pale light pushed through the curtains as I stirred awake. Jonas's bed was already empty, covers barely disturbed. I sat up listening. No footsteps, no voices, just the creak of the old cabin settling into the cold. Downstairs, the fireplace had burned low. Ty and Mason stood in the kitchen, whispering over mugs of coffee like two characters in a scene I hadn't been invited into. The moment they noticed me, they fell quiet. Ty offered a half smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Jonas went for a walk," Mason said before I could ask. "In the snow?" He needed air. I nodded, said nothing. Poured myself a coffee I didn't want. The mug felt too warm in my hands, and yet my fingertips stayed cold. By late morning, Jonas still hadn't returned. The others grew restless. Ty more than anyone, checking the window every few minutes. It made something in my gut twist. Not out of worry for Jonas. Out of something else. Something that felt too much like suspicion. When Jonas finally walked through the door, his cheeks were pink from the cold, his curls damp with melted snow. He looked at me once, fleetingly, then straight to Ty, who was already moving toward him. "Everything okay?" Ty asked, voice too soft. Jonas nodded. Just needed quiet. The two of them moved into the hallway, out of sight. I stood frozen, unable to ignore the weight of the door swinging closed behind them. It wasn't just a conversation. I could feel it in my chest, like static building just before a storm. A few minutes later, I walked outside, needing space. I stood on the porch, trying to breathe. The trees were covered in frost, icicles hanging like glass teeth from the roof's edge. But I wasn't looking at the trees. I was listening. The cabin wasn't soundproof, and the walls near the back were thin. A voice, Ty's, came low and fast, urgent but controlled. "You should have told him." Jonas replied, muffled. It didn't mean anything. I didn't know it would turn into. "That's not the point." Then silence, sharp and sudden. I stepped back before either of them saw me. My heart thudded against my ribs. I wasn't sure what I'd just heard, but I knew enough. When I went back inside, Jonas was sitting on the couch, flipping through a book he wasn't reading. Ty was gone. I sat across from him. My hands were shaking, so I stuffed them into my jacket pockets. "Anything you want to tell me?" I asked, keeping my tone level. Jonas looked up slowly. His eyes gave away more than his words ever had. They were heavy, apologetic, but guarded. "There's nothing going on," he said. "That's not what it sounded like." He swallowed, but didn't break eye contact. Ty and I, we were a thing. A while ago, before this trip. It ended. Why didn't you say anything? Because I didn't think it mattered. Until you mattered. I stared at him, letting those words settle. They didn't land the way he probably meant them to. "You're telling me this now?" I didn't know how to. I didn't want to ruin what we were starting. "Then you should have told me before you kissed me," I said, voice cracking against the weight of it all. Jonas stood, pacing a little. "I messed up. I know that. But Ty and I, whatever that was, is over. This with you, it's different." I shook my head. "Then why were you whispering to him behind closed doors?" His silence was louder than confession. I left the room before I said something I couldn't pull back. Upstairs, I sat on the edge of the bed, fists clenched, chest hollow. The quiet of the mountains no longer felt clean. It felt isolating. Like every breath I took was filtered through a lie I hadn't seen coming. That evening, Mason announced we'd be cutting the trip short due to road concerns. Ice was thickening fast, and he didn't want to risk getting stuck. No one argued. Jonas tried to talk to me again after dinner, catching me just outside the bunk room. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, "but I wasn't playing you. I didn't expect this. Us. You keep saying that," I said, "like I'm something you tripped over." He looked pained. "I'm trying to be honest now." "Now," I repeated, bitterness creeping in. He took a step closer. "I felt something with you. I still do." I stepped back. "Then maybe next time start with the truth." I went into the room and closed the door, not slamming it, but firm enough to end the conversation. That night, I couldn't sleep. And even though Jonas slept in the bed across from mine, it felt like we were miles apart. By the time we left the cabin, the storm had softened into a dull memory. The roads were still slick with ice, the trees still heavy with snow, but the sky had cleared, washed pale blue and cloudless. Everyone packed quietly, as if talking too much might cause something to crack. Jonas kept his distance. I kept mine. We didn't ride in the same row during the drive back. Mason tried to fill the silence with music, but the van felt quieter than it had on the way in, like everyone knew something had shifted but didn't know how to name it. Even Ty, who had never missed an opportunity for attention, leaned against a window and stared out at the endless pine trees without saying much. I watched Jonas in the rearview mirror more times than I'd like to admit. He sat still, his fingers curled into fists in his lap. I wonder if he regretted telling me the truth, or regretted not telling it soon enough. Maybe both. When we reached the city, no one really said goodbye, just stiff nods and quick hugs. Everyone eager to return to lives that felt simpler than whatever had tangled us together in the mountains. Mason dropped me off last. Before I got out, he looked at me for a long time. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "Doesn't feel like it," he said, but didn't press. Back in my apartment. Everything was where I had left it. My boot still sat by the door. The kettle on the stove hadn't been used in days. But somehow, the space felt foreign, like I was stepping into someone else's life. Maybe because the one I briefly imagined, one with Jonas, no longer existed. For a week, I didn't hear from him. I didn't expect to. I filled my time with anything that didn't require thinking. Work, podcasts, long walks around my neighborhood. At night, I lay in bed with the lights off, replaying things I didn't want to remember. The porch, the firelight, his laugh, the way his voice sounded when he told me he wasn't good at pretending, the way it had felt when he kissed me, and the way it felt when I found out he hadn't told me everything. Then, one morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Jonas stood there. No jacket, no gloves, just a folder in his hands and a look in his eyes that made it hard to breathe. "I won't stay long," he said. "I just wanted to give you this." He handed me the folder. Inside was a letter. No salutation, no date, just his handwriting, uneven and rushed. He said he didn't know how to be the person I deserved, that he hadn't been trying to deceive me, only trying to believe, for once, that something new could erase something old. that he was sorry for making me carry the weight of something he should have told me from the start. He ended it with, "If this is the last time we talk, I hope you know you woke something up in me. Something I thought I'd buried. Thank you for that." I closed the folder, looked up at him. He didn't say anything. "Where are you going?" I asked. "Portland," he replied. "My brother's there. Said I could crash while I figured things out." I nodded. "When?" "Tomorrow." I wanted to say something profound, something that would hold the right amount of goodbye, and maybe, but all I said was, "Take care of yourself." He nodded, then hesitated. "I didn't mean to hurt you." "I know," I said, "but you did." His eyes glistened just for a second, and then he turned and walked down the hallway. I didn't watch him leave. After he was gone, I sat with the letter for a long time, read it twice, folded it back carefully, placed it in the drawer, beside my bed. Weeks passed, then months. Jonas didn't come back, and I didn't chase after him. But I carried something from that trip, not anger, not heartbreak, but a kind of understanding, a recognition that sometimes people cross into your life not to stay, but to show you something you needed to see. He reminded me that I could feel again, that I was still capable of connection, even if it didn't last. And in some quiet way, that mattered more than I realized. Sometimes, healing is a straight line. It's a moment on a porch under cold stars. It's a single kiss in firelight. It's a goodbye that doesn't close the door completely, but leaves it just open enough for the light to change.